briefly, brief teaching on the last days, the time between His comings. We are living in an age between the first advent of Christ and the second coming of Christ. Now, all of the apostles and all of the Pharisees eagerly awaited for the first coming of the Messiah. They didn't see necessarily there would be a time in between. So this is all very confusing for them as they're listening. It's a little bit easier for us to follow because we know what happens after this time. We know that Jesus goes to the cross. We know that Jesus dies for sin. We know that Jesus is buried in a rich man's tomb. We know that 3 days later He arose again. And we know that 40 days after that, He ascended and told His disciples, in the same way that I ascend, I'm going to come back. So it's easier for us. They didn't have that information at the time. So this seems a little cryptic to them. It seems a little bit cryptic to them. Jesus Christ, His first coming, was to atone for sin. Was to atone for sin. The time between His coming is when the gospel is preached to all nations. And when He returns the second time, it will not be to preach the gospel, it will be to judge the nations and to gather to Himself His bride, the redeemed, the church. That's the skinny. That's the grand overview in about 5 seconds. All right? Some particulars. Jesus will return. Turn to Matthew chapter 24. We'll look at a few verses. This is the Olivet Discourse, Jesus talking about the end times in Matthew chapter 24. We'll kind of jump around here. Look at verse 30 and 31. Verse 30 and 31, Jesus says, Then will appear in the heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And He will send out His angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather His elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Jesus is referring to His second coming, when He comes back to judge the nations, and all of the elect, all believers everywhere will be gathered to Himself. That is, Jesus will return. As sure as the sun will rise in the east, the Son of Man will return in the clouds. You can count on it. Also, no one knows when. Not even Harold Camping knows when. In fact, if you want to guarantee when Jesus won't return, publish the date that you think He's going to return. And there's some magical law of probability that when you publish that, you can guarantee He won't come back on that date. Promise. Absolutely promise. Anyone who has ever tried to say when Jesus has come back looks like a complete fool, because that's what they are. Complete and utter fools. Now, some of you are like, oh, I hate it when you just get so dogmatic and you're so intense and you're calling people out by name and calling them fools. Well, you just have to learn to live with me. Look at verse 36 and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Verse 36 of chapter 24. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows. Not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. It's almost as if Jesus is in heaven, and He says, Dad, when am I going to return? I don't know. Why don't you ask Harold? He's got it all figured out. Are you kidding me? That someone on earth, whether it's Pastor Russell, the founder of the Jehovah's Witness, who said that Jesus would return in 1914, or Harold Camping that said he would return May 21st of 2011, it doesn't matter. You're not smarter than the Son. And so that's why I'm very bold and kind of brash in saying that people that make predictions like that are utter and complete fools. And when they do, I'm not calling into question whether or not Harold Camping was a believer. I don't know that. He seems to be. But when believers who are sincere predict when Jesus is going to return, it brings discredit to the authenticity of the Scripture, which says you can't do that. But then the world looks at him and equates his faith with the rest of Christianity, which is clearly taught, stop being dumb. Don't be dumb. Don't do that. So, yeah, I'm going to rail on that just for 30 seconds.